This video is going to be quite flashy. Howdy everyone, this is it. A video you guys asked for and you've been asking for us to do, so we went ahead and did it. And this one's all about flashes, or in other terms, also called a speedlight. We'll cover all the settings that you can adjust when it comes to flash, or speedlights. Yeah, how to set up your camera, and to take maximum advantage of having this tool in your arsenal. So let's go take a look. First, let's get organized when it comes to flashes. In general, there are three types of flashes. Integrated or internal flashes, which are already part of the camera. Speedlights, which are attached to the camera via the hot shoe. And finally, strobe flashes, which usually need to be placed on a tripod, ideally with a modifier. These are the most commonly used in studios, as they often need to be plugged in directly into your power grid. In this video, we're going to mainly focus on speedlights, because internal flashes often are quite weak and it's really hard to adjust them in any meaningful way. And also studio strobe lights are going to be a bit different and just a different way of setting them up. But if you guys are interested in us doing a video about studio strobe lights, please leave a comment below. Next, let's talk about how to select a flash. The most important thing is that the flash can communicate with your camera. And the hot shoe might actually look the same on all cameras, but communication between the flash and the camera is going to be crucial for the flash to work properly. Which leads us to another important point when selecting a flash, the TTL or eTTL function. In short, this is a flash mode that, thanks to the communication with the camera and its exposure meter, adjusts the flash power or focal length according to what we're shooting. It's hard to find a flash these days that doesn't have this feature, but it's still a good idea to verify that it does before purchasing it. Another key parameter when choosing a flash is going to be its guide number, or also identified as GN. Now, this simply refers to the power and flash distance capability, and it depends on what you'll use the flash for, but a flash with a GN rating of at least 60 is what is commonly recommended. The last feature to look for when buying a flash is going to be the HSS, or high speed sync, but we'll get into that later, because first we need to understand how to approach exposure settings. Once we've chosen a flash, we can start shooting, but how do we set it up correctly? So flash settings have two aspects. One, how to adjust the flash, and two, how to adjust the camera. Let's start with the flash. Now, to understand this as best as possible, we're going to need to switch from the TTL mode to manual mode. And in manual mode, there are several parameters that we can adjust. The most important one is the flash power, which is usually expressed as a fraction, and sometimes even as the distance that the flash will physically reach. Be careful with those fractions. While it might seem trivial and kind of similar to something like our numbers for the shutter speed, this is actually going to be fractions of the flash's power. So, the smaller the number, the less power the flash will emit, not the faster that it will flash. Next, we can adjust the zoom on the flash. For zoom lenses, this should adjust automatically with the TTL according to the focal length. For prime lenses, it's better to adjust this manually. This parameter controls how wide or narrow the flash beam is. Now let's move on from the flash to the camera. Exposure settings are definitely something that are going to affect your final image, and that's especially true if your flash as well as your camera are in manual mode or manual settings. Now again, the holy trinity of exposure, which we've covered before, is going to be shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and all these play slightly different roles here than in regular photography. Now, if you're unsure about exposure settings even without using a flash, be sure to check out a video we did in the past. The link should be here, as well as in the description. So aperture and ISO function very similarly to regular photography by lightening or darkening the overall exposure, but the only difference is that they essentially work from the background forward. So by gradually increasing the aperture or lowering the ISO, the photo will gradually darken from the background toward the foreground. Now, this is due to the physics of how light actually travels, weakening as it moves from the flash outward into the scene. Therefore, it seems like these parameters weaken from the background toward the camera. But where things are quite different is with the shutter speed. The shutter speed has no effect on the exposure of the object by it being lit by the flash. It only affects the surrounding light. Now, why is that? Well, it has to do with flash power settings. The flash always fires for the same duration, so even if you set a longer shutter speed, the sensor doesn't have the time to absorb that more light that you emitted like it would with a constant light source, such as daylight. Now this can have a both positive as well as a negative effect on your photo. So with a longer shutter speed, you can affect the contrast between the foreground and the background, which helps separate the subject from the background. Or you can get creative and create something like this. But we'll talk about that later. On the negative side, if you set a very short shutter speed, usually 1/320th or shorter, you might see dark bands in the photo. And this happens because the flash just doesn't have enough time to illuminate the entire frame. Now, however, some flashes feature HSS or high speed sync, and if you activate this function, you can shoot at much shorter shutter speeds. So if you know that you need to shoot at the shortest shutter speed possible, look for a flash with this feature. Now, we also shouldn't forget about white balance. So it's best to set it to the preset specifically for flashes, which in most cases, cameras have in their presets. All right, so we've chosen and set up our flash, but are we ready to start shooting yet? No, not yet, because we still have this adjustable top thing for. Now, what in the heck could that be good for? So let's imagine a model situation. We want to photograph an object, and it seems natural to tilt the flash forward and point it directly at the subject. However, when we take the shot, even though the exposure is fine, the flash creates very harsh shadows. And if the subject is looking directly into the lens, well, there won't be any shadows on their face. So the photo will look flat with no depth and lacking any quote-unquote drama. Now, we could soften the flash with a diffuser, but at greater distances, the diffuser loses any of its effectiveness and the differences are minimal. That's why most photographers, especially those that are shooting portraits, are gonna wanna bounce off their light, and that's where this adjustable head comes in handy. So you can bounce the light in different ways. For instance, off the ceiling, where the head is directed upward, and the ceiling essentially becomes a large light source. Just make sure the ceiling isn't too high so that the light doesn't have to travel all the way up and then bounce back down and become quite weak. You can also bounce the light off a wall besides you or even behind you. And since we don't have a wall that's close by here, we'll have to simulate it with a white reflector, but the principle stays the same. The key to bouncing light is the color of the wall. White is gonna, of course, reflect the best. So the darker the color, naturally less light is gonna be reflected, and colored walls might actually be interesting in this case as they could cast an interesting tint onto your photo. So keep that in mind as you could really take advantage of that. But if you're shooting outdoors, we often don't have things to bounce off of. So what now? So some flashes can bounce the light themselves. You just need to pull out this white little card and tilt the head to adjust how much light goes directly to the subject versus how much is bounced. And now we're left with nothing more than to take the flash off of the camera and fire it off camera. Some flashes can communicate directly with the camera, while others are gonna need a remote trigger. Now, remote triggers have the advantage of controlling everything directly from the trigger, and you can easily link multiple flashes into groups and trigger several flashes simultaneously. At this point, it's useful to add something like a modifier, an umbrella, or perhaps a softbox. But that leans more into studio strobe techniques, which we might cover another time, so let us know. So those are the basics of using a flash. Now, we've also prepared a list that gives you a bunch of tips on how you can more creatively use the flash, or any kind of flash for that matter, so that you can create more awesome photographs. If you have small lights or other light elements in the background, try setting a longer exposure time on your camera, like 1/40th or longer. And while pressing the shutter, move the camera sideways or rotate it. The subject in the foreground will be sharply in focus, while the background will create an interesting play-on of lights. Or you could use the same technique with a moving object. The subject will again be sharp, but you'll get blurred streaks in the background showing the trajectory of the movement. Lately, photos that simulate the flash of a Polaroid or disposable cameras are actually quite popular when combined with a wide-angle lens. And these photos have sort of a 90s style look. Just lower the exposure as much as possible to make the background very dark, point the flash directly at the subject, and then just keep clicking. So that was a bit about how you can use a flash and have it enhance your photography. I hope it was useful, and if you have any other comments or questions about it, feel free to let us know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for sticking around. Hope it was a good video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe bell so that you never miss a video. Give us a thumbs up. We like it. And I hope to catch you in the next one. Until then, take care.